I'm really pleased to introduce today Congressman Jamie Raskin, who represents Maryland's 8th Congressional District, which happens to include the offices of NCCS. He is serving his third term in Congress, and he is a very busy legislator. He serves on the House Judiciary Committee, the Committee on Oversight and Reform, the Committee on House Administration, the Rules Committee, the Coronavirus Select Committee, and the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. He is a cancer survivor and a member of the House Cancer Survivors Caucus, and we're pleased to report that he is a co-sponsor of the Cancer Care Planning and Communications Act. Thank you so much for joining us, Congressman Raskin.
Shelley, I'm really psyched to be with you, especially since I am the congressman from NCCS, since you guys are in my district.
And I live in your district as well. However, with the redistricting that Maryland has done, I will not be in your district next year.
Oh no, I'm
in Frederick County. So,
well,
but I will still claim you as my own since you are NCCS's representative. So you've shared with us before that you're a colon cancer survivor. Do you mind sharing more about your experience and your cancer survivorship journey?
That makes it sound a little bit more romantic than it was when you talk about is my cancer journey. I did it all. I did chemo and I did radiation and I had surgery 2 different times. And I remember reading an essay by Susan Sontag during that time where she said that everybody's born with 2 passports, and one passport is in the land of the healthy and the living, and the other is, in the land of the sick and the dying. And we'd like to just use one passport in our lives, but everybody is going to use both of them at some point. And I went over, and I remember when, I was given kind of like a 50-50 prognosis. I was stage 3 when they diagnosed it. And, but when I got through it, and I had my last chemo, and I said to the doctor, what do I do now? And he just said, you go home. And I just kind of broke down, but I felt like I'd been away in a foreign land, even though I hadn't gone anywhere really, except for the hospital a lot and to go and get my chemo infusions and everything. But there were a lot of people who helped me through it, the nurses and the physician assistants and the doctors, and of course my family and friends and my colleagues. And I learned a lot from the experience, and it changed me in a whole bunch of different ways. And I still think about it. It was now more than a decade ago.
Yeah, people tell us all the time that the first year after treatment was harder than treatment because of that, exactly what you said about feeling like they're in a foreign land and then you're not going in to see your care team on a regular basis. So you don't have all of that support that you had during treatment, and you just have to sort of navigate on your own. And that's why we're trying to advocate for better survivorship care for really throughout cancer care, but also in that post-treatment period when people feel that lost in transition sometimes.
Yeah, and you might have like minor ailments, physical or emotional or whatever it might be, which seem to pale by comparison to what you've gone through before. And you don't really have anybody necessarily to help you with it. And so you just kind of suck it up and, do it on your own. And so I do think that there's a lot of value in what you're doing in terms of promoting better communication and always better education. And I had felt for a long time that I think that it was my own failures of education about nutrition that really contributed to my problems. But I know that the whole medical apparatus can do a lot better talking about nutrition coming out. And I think just generally nutrition is part of healthcare that is so neglected in our country.
Yeah, and we do a survey every year, our State of Cancer Survivorship Survey, and exercise and nutrition are 2 of the areas that we hear from survivors that they know are issues of importance, but they don't feel like they're getting all the information that they need. Well, you mentioned communication, and what we'll be advocating for in our virtual Hill meetings this week is the Cancer Care Planning and Communication Act. And we know communication is so important to the quality of cancer care and the quality of life for cancer survivors. So how helpful was the communication about your own cancer with your care team?
Well, I would just say it varied. I mean, it really depended on the particular doctor or nurse who I was dealing with. I mean, some were just chock full of information and tips and hints and, you know, counseling and advice on how to think about different things, how to understand different things. And then others, I mean, it was kind of radio silence.
Mhm.
And, you know, I felt like I was on my own in some ways at certain parts of
Mhm.
the journey as you have it, you know.
So how has your experience changed your work as a legislator, first in the Maryland legislature, where you continue to work throughout your treatment, and now in Congress?
Well, in Annapolis, I was a state senator. Thank you for recalling that at the time. And I used to go to the Anne Arundel Medical Center, which is a wonderful facility. And I would get my chemo infusions there. I would come back. And at the time, I was leading the legislative floor fight for marriage equality. Seems like a long time ago that gay people couldn't get married in our state. But and I'd come back from the hospital and I had on a chemo belt because I got this like drip infusion over 48 hours of the chemo. And the guy who sat next to me, who was my buddy Jim Brochin from Baltimore County, used to say that I was just wearing the belt to try to get votes for marriage equality through sympathy of my colleagues, which is probably partly true. But anyway, the Senate was very flexible and accommodating of my schedule with the chemo because we were having a debate over a few week period. But when the debate ended over marriage equality and we voted and we passed it just by a couple of votes, and it was an historic moment because it was the first state in the union to do that without an order by a state Supreme Court compelling the legislature to act. So it was a big deal nationally. But you know, when you're the floor leader, you get to make a little speech when it's all over. And I got up and I said that I had learned something through doing my chemo treatments at the same time that I was leading the floor fight for marriage for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. And I said I learned the difference between misfortune and injustice, because if you wake up and your life is going swimmingly well, and then you're told by a doctor you've got stage 3 colon cancer, and you have a family you love and children you love and a wife you love and constituents and job you love and so on, and then you're told, you know, it's a 50-50 proposition. I mean, it's a terrible misfortune, but it's just a misfortune because it can happen to anybody. And it happens to people every single day. And we can't forget, it's not just in cancer, it's in a whole panoply of diseases and conditions that people suffer. It's a misfortune. But if you're told you can't get health care because you love the wrong person, or you're unemployed, or for some other reason, that's not just a misfortune, that's an injustice, because that we can do something about. And so life is hard enough with all the illness and sickness and accident and tragedy, that it should not be the role of government to compound the normal misfortunes of life with injustice. It should be the role of government to try to remove injustice and alleviate misfortune as much as possible.
Thank you. That's so eloquent. I've heard you talk about the difference between misfortune and injustice before, and it's such a beautiful way of putting it and so important. And you know, you're right. I mean, cancer can strike any of us, but the injustice is when not everyone has the same chance to survive that cancer and to live well after cancer. So we appreciate you being an advocate there and sharing your story. I know that's really important to have people like you in Congress. So those of us who follow the news closely know the environment on Capitol Hill is challenging, to say the least. But we also know that cancer is a nonpartisan issue that touches everyone. How important is it to work in a bipartisan fashion on cancer policy issues?
Well, it's critical to do it. I would go beyond that and say it's not just bipartisan, it's multi-partisan or nonpartisan. I mean, a lot of people who hate both of our parties, there are Democrats, there are Republicans, there's independents, there's Greens, there's libertarians, and, we can fight like cats and dogs in the campaign period, but once we're elected and we take office, I think that those of us who aspire and attain to public office have got to remember that the word party comes from the French word parti. It means one part. And our job is to represent the whole, to represent everybody. So it's critical to work that way. Cancer obviously afflicts people across party registration lines. And I would go even further to say that not only do we need to be doing that in a holistic, comprehensive way for everybody, but it is one of those issues and problems that we think about that could actually transform the way we think about everything, because it does restore to us our humanity. I mean, those people who are caught up in super ideological politics, like think about the people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th, they're basically thinking about society as just factions, and they're an armed faction. But when you're trying to address the problem of cancer, you're thinking about society as an entirety because it touches everybody's family. And I would much prefer to think about my job in terms of what we can do to advance the well-being of the whole population, rather than what can I do to fight for this group against that group or this party against that party.
Yeah, oh, that's great. So when our advocates are meeting with their members of Congress this week to talk about the cancer care planning legislation, what advice would you give them when they're talking to the members of Congress and their staff about the legislation they support?
Well, I would talk in really personal terms about why you're there. I would talk about, the facets of your own individual story in dealing with cancer that connect to this issue. So think about that in advance. You can try it out on your friends and the group that you're going to be with, so everybody can be as cogent and as compelling as possible. And figure out how you can connect to the member or the staff people that you're talking to. What are the parts of your story? What are the parts of your pitch that will definitely resonate with them? But I think you're right that everybody either has someone in their family or has a friend who has dealt with this. It continues to be a plague upon the land. But all of the organizing that you're doing and the other groups have done around cancer, it means that we're in a much more aggressive posture towards dealing with it. And it's such a great thing. And it is a victory for democracy. And I especially want to applaud the coalition and the other groups that are there day in and day out, because one of the problems with trying to organize people who are sick is that they don't have a lot of time or a lot of energy to go and lobby and petition and so on. And so we need institutionalized organizational support to keep that going. And then as people come through it, we can join the fight, and even people who are dealing with it find the energy to come in. I've had lots of people fighting cancer come and talk to me, and it's a very moving thing to see them do that.
Well, and I think, to your point, the people who are dealing with disease, it's harder for them to get up to Washington, D.C. to visit with their members. And it seems to me one benefit of of having so many virtual meetings during the pandemic has been that people who don't have the means or aren't healthy enough to travel can still speak with their legislators and their staff members. And what do you think about the effectiveness of virtual Hill meetings? And do you see that as something that'll be here to stay?
I think it is a huge breakthrough. I believe it's here to stay, and I hope it will be here to stay. I mean, it does mean that somebody, who's suffering from, lung cancer or colon cancer, leukemia in the northern part of my district, which is, right near the Gettysburg battlefield in Pennsylvania, somebody who's up in Thurmont or Middletown, they can hop on the Zoom and we can, be face to face, and they don't have to travel 2 or 3 hours down and 2 or 3 hours back, at a time when it might be difficult to do that. So I think that Zoom lobbying is a huge breakthrough that makes it far more egalitarian and democratic, especially for people who are either too sick to come or they've got to work and they can't come. That's a big deal, and it cuts down on the amount of time that everybody's got to spend on bureaucracy. And we just, obviously we lose a little bit in terms of human touch and human connection, but that's not been a bad thing during COVID-19.
And so one of the things we share with our advocates is that, doesn't matter whether they're meeting with the member or their staff members, they're still going to get their points across, and that staff members will then share that information with their boss. Can you talk about how you get feedback from, how you hear about all the people who've come in and met with your staff members, even when you weren't able to join the meetings yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't get hung up on that at all. I mean, the important thing is that you get the names of the legislation, the names of the bills or the amendments you're working on to the committee. You let the member, to the member or the staff or the committee, you let the member know that you're supporting it strongly and you're watching and you're attuned to it, and you want to know, is the member going to co-sponsor? Is the member going to vote for it? Is the member going to be there for it? Is the member going to speak on its behalf? That's the critical thing. If you have a specific story or point you want to get across to the member, you can, email them or leave a letter or whatever if the member can't be there. I mean, I of course love to meet with you guys when you come in and the cancer survivors whenever I can, but it's not always possible just because of the crush of committee business and the vote schedule.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything else you want to share, or any other words of wisdom you would give to the advocates before they head to their, I'd say head to the Hill, but head to their Zoom meetings this week?
Well, I just, I guess I want to commend you for what you're doing, and I hope you don't forget how special and important it is. There are not a lot of countries on earth that operate like this. I'm not saying America's perfect just because I'm feeling super patriotic for the 4th of July weekend right now, but we do have space for people to get together, to associate, and to advance a really important cause, something that's so personal for so many of us. And it's not necessarily like that in a lot of countries, a lot of governments around the world. So let's not take our democracy for granted. They can be tipped over quite easily, as we saw on January the 6th. I mean, there are coups and insurrections and political violence all over the world. We don't want to go down that road. And I want to say that the work you're doing is helping not just make progress for us in terms of cancer treatment and cancer diagnosis and cancer screening and cancer care, but it's also helping keep our democracy strong by making government focus on the important stuff. So thank you for what you're doing. Happy 4th of July, everybody.
Thank you so much, Congressman. We really appreciate your time.
I appreciate it. And thanks for having me, Shelley. I hope to see you soon.
Great. Thank you. Have a great day.